Are actors left-wing? That's something I think a lot of people assume, that actors are left-wing. And what I mean by left-wing is a left-wing person is a person who wants to change the status quo. A left-wing person is someone who believes in meritocracy, egalitarianism, someone who doesn't like entrenched hierarchies where people just monopolize power for the sake of monopolizing power, and power is not granted, it's not merited according to virtue. So that's basically how I view the left-right dichotomy, that the right wing is therefore the entrenched monopoly powers. It could be, a Hobbesian sovereign, a king, it could be a corporation, it could be a communist dictatorship, but all of these would be forms of right-wing power, whereas the leftist would be the evolutionary system, the system where you don't care about someone's lineage, their ancestral lineage, you don't care about the deeds of their ancestors, you don't care about their inherited wealth. Power is not granted according to old broken systems. Power is granted according to the merit that you can prove in the here and the now. So we have to ask this question, are actors left-wing or right-wing, at least psychologically? And we could make the argument that actors are left-wing. And I think the argument would go something like this. It would essentially be saying that in order to be an actor, you have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You have to be willing to consider the perspectives of other people. And so that in itself, the ability to have this non-dogmatic thinking is central to the left. That the left the left psychologically perceives ideas critically. It perceives them skeptically. It perceives them in such a way as it can consider them. It can consider the positives, the negatives, reasons to be skeptical, reasons to be credible. It can consider all these things and then make an informed decision, whereas the right wing is totally authoritarian. For the right winger, all that matters is the established power. So if we were living in a monarchy, the right-winger would say, God save the king, and anyone who besmirches the king should be killed. In a communist dictatorship, it would be, long live communism, viva la revolucion, and anyone who questions communism is a reactionary and should be killed. If we were living in, an Islamist Sharia law theocracy, it would be anyone who questions Islam should be killed. A Christian theocracy, anyone who is a heretic should be killed. If we were living in a Jewish state, it would be the rebellious Goyim should be killed. If we were being, and I can give so many examples of when you have a right-wing power structure, a psychological authoritarian, a right-wing person is going to identify the power structure and align themselves with the power structure. A very interesting thing today would be, what is the power structure of the world? Well, someone who identifies as a Democrat is often going to say the power structure that rules the world is white supremacy, and therefore a right-wing person, according to I just laid out in this video what right and left really mean. And people who call themselves Democrats will say white supremacy is the power structure. So in their mind, they think that they are authentic leftists. They think they're really questioning the power structure by attacking white supremacy. And to an extent, it's not that they're totally false. It's not that white people are not overrepresented. White people are overrepresented. Jews are overrepresented. We can look at certain cases where Indians are overrepresented in a certain 7-Eleven or a hotel business, or Koreans are overrepresented in dry cleaning. We can find all kinds of ethnic overrepresentation, but if we want to take a big picture, a global picture, and look at top company CEOs, we see a lot of white overrepresentation. We see Jewish overrepresentation. Now, the white ethnocentric people are just going to focus as the Jews because that's the main competitor. The Jews are going to focus on the whites. So if we identify white supremacy as the big problem in the world, you could say that is a kind of a Jewish perspective. But then, the other side of the coin of where you have white ethnocentric people say, well, Jews are overrepresented. Meanwhile, they don't care about, white overrepresentation is merited, but Jewish overrepresentation is not. So that's just a fundamental contradiction of perspective. And you would think that actors, because they're constantly getting in the heads of various characters, I think Shia LaBeouf actually converted to Christianity for a specific role where he was going to portray a Christian in a war film. I never saw the war film. But that whole concept, that whole idea of going so far, or Heath Ledger played the Joker and then he killed himself, and people said that, well, he got so into the method acting, he got so into the mentality of evil and chaos of the Joker, he ended up killing himself. So we can find all these examples and say, well, the actor is fundamentally leftist because the actor is someone who's a non-dogmatic thinker, whereas the right wing is always dogmatic. If the dogma is communism, they're a communist. If the dogma is Islam, they're a Muslim. If the dogma is Christianity, they're a Christian. If the dogma is monarchism, they are a monarchist. So that is the right wing. The actors, the left-wingers, are always on the edges of society. In ancient Greece and Rome, an actor was equivalent to a prostitute. And so actors have always been seen on the psychological fringes of society, always sort of, there's something anti-authoritarian about or against the traditional society. And so they've always been relegated to the fringes of society. Of course, today, actors are at the center of society. Actors are at the center of Hollywood, and Hollywood is the mythological creation center of our modern globalist world. So there has been a shift. And it's not to say that the Greeks didn't have their drama and their comedies and their tragedies. It's not to say that wasn't an important part of Greek culture. Although you had Greeks themselves who were critical of it and who said, we shouldn't be engaging in this kind of entertainment. It's really vulgar, it's lowbrow, there's something filthy about it, and we should avoid it. So it wasn't as if just because we have a historical record of Greeks who went and enjoyed these things and produced these dramas, doesn't mean that everyone in Greece was on board with it. And there was a critical aspect to it as well. So, all in all, we can see arguments, we can see reasonable arguments for why you would say an actor is someone who's left-wing, because they're able to see all these different perspectives, and therefore they're a non-dogmatic thinker as opposed to the right-winger who just, accepts whatever the authority is. But there's a problem with this argument, especially in the contemporary world, when we actually look at there are more actors than ever before. The acting profession is more popular than ever before. The actors are the new aristocrats. And so previously you had aristocrats, and the reason why they were aristocrats were basically for two reasons. The first reason would be warfare. So Charlemagne, he was a warrior king. He had a line of descent. Most aristocrats in Europe can trace their lineage somehow, some way back to Charlemagne. And that institution of every time someone wins a battle, rather than giving them the Iron Cross or the Medal of Valor or some kind of medal, you would often ennoble them. And, you see this in ancient Greece and Rome, where someone would win a battle and they're granted land, and they become a landowner, and they become essentially what in the feudal medieval system would be called a lord. They become a lord. So whenever you have land owning was equivalent to this lordship, this aristocracy, and you were inducted into it, and you could join into it, and new blood came in, essentially through people winning battles or playing important parts in battles for showing bravery in battle. So the power structure was all based on how good were you at being a warrior. Now that shifted over time as society stabilized and the nature of war changed to be less about individual bravery and valor and the warrior archetype, the warrior ideal, and it became more about who has the most money, which side has the most money, who can hire more mercenaries, who has the better technology, who has the better equipment. That shifted, and you can see different staccato events because evolution is often works by jumps. It's a punctuated equilibrium, and so it's not just a smooth gradual progression, but we can look back to the Indo-Europeans with the first chariots in the Ukrainian steppe and the Turanian steppe, and we can look at the mounted archers of the Mongol Empire. We can look at different, of course, to say nothing about guns, germs, and steel, and the invention of firearms and the utilization of firearms. That progression obviously changes the nature of warfare over time, and I would say that warfare has been changing ever since the Neolithic technological revolution. You have farming, you have a population explosion, changes the nature of war. A Paleolithic population cannot compete with Neolithic peoples, because even if those Paleolithic peoples are 8 feet tall and they're super strong, they're like superhumans. If you have a million Neolithic farmers who can just keep pumping out babies because they have urbanism, they have cities, they have this mass population density, and they can keep attacking you in waves and waves and waves, it doesn't matter how effective you are as a Paleolithic warrior, you're going to fall. And this is basically what happened to the Native Americans. The Native Americans, they utilized all of their adult males for their warrior force. And, they would beat Europeans a lot of the time. But the Europeans just had more people, and so they could continue to have engagements, continue to send out more and more recruits, more and more reserves, and ultimately overwhelm the Native Americans. So we're talking about technological evolution, we're talking about the evolution of the aristocracy, we're talking about how the aristocracy went from being a warrior aristocracy, really rooted in the Paleolithic warrior roots of Europe, and over time, over the last 10,000 years, that has changed significantly. Now we could even go before the last 10,000 years. We could go 40,000 years ago, where Europe is dominated by Neanderthals, who were, by all accounts, more robust than Homo sapiens. Robust is simply a fancy word for stacked. They were stacked, they were jacked, and they were juiced. And these guys were tough guys. And the Homo sapiens went in, and it wasn't that the Homo sapiens were more jacked and juiced, but it was that the Homo sapiens were just, they were more, essentially they were more R-selective rather than K-selective. They overwhelmed the Neanderthals with money, or excuse me, not with money, they didn't have money, but with numbers. I'm confusing the quantitative civilizational aspects here, money versus numbers. But there was a quantitative aspect. And there could have also been a technological aspect. There could have been some form of outsmarting the Neanderthals. But the Neanderthals had bigger brains than the Homo sapiens at the time. Now, the human brain has been growing. For the last 40,000, 80,000 years, the human brain has been growing. Homo sapiens, their brain has been growing up till the present day. Now, with dysgenics, that trend might reverse, or we might be hitting a tipping point at some point with we sort of exhaust the benefits of nutrition, and we're sort of going downhill now. But we're just starting with that, basically. And so when you have this growth over time, and we look at a modern human's brain, we look at an ancient Neanderthal's brain, that's not a fair comparison, because really the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were coming into contact between 80,000 and 40,000 years ago. And at that time, I think Homo sapiens brains, if you look at this trend of Homo sapiens brains growing over time, they probably would have had smaller brains than we do today. Especially since today we have Neanderthal admixture if you're of non-sub-Saharan African origin. Even if you're African American, you could have 25% Caucasoid ancestry, so you've got your Neanderthal that way. But almost everybody, the majority of the human population has Neanderthal admixture, although that's actually decreasing with the fact that Africa is expected to have a population boom from 1 billion to 4 billion. So going from maybe 10% of the global population to being maybe 50% of the global population. So that's certainly going to change the dynamics here. Neanderthals are losing at this point. But all in all, what I'm trying to say is that there's a huge, we can zoom in on little historical events, and we can find a trend, we can find a pattern, we can zoom out, we can find an analogous pattern. We can see we're moving in the same direction and zoom out and out and out as far as you want to go. And these patterns seem to be recursive, they seem to be perennial, they seem to be part of some overarching story that's going on here. And that's something that's important when you talk about contemporary politics. You have to understand that the people who are ultimately the highest IQ people, the highest agency people, if you have high IQ and you have high agency and you're interested in changing society, you're going to be aware of history because you're going to be smart enough to understand history and you're going to have high enough agency to do the work to study history. So it's not just about high IQ and it's not just about high agency, but you combine both of those traits. And the rulers of society, whether they have high agency or high IQ, they're at least hiring people who are very, very smart and who have very high agency. They're hiring these people to do their work for them. So the knowledge of this stuff, people have the knowledge and people are utilizing the knowledge. People are aware of this, and it's going into part of their calculations and how they govern things and how they push certain things. So you should be aware of it as well. It is a digression, it is a tangent off the original point where I was saying essentially that today the aristocracy is Hollywood actors. We look at Brad Pitt as a king or a prince. We look at Lady Gaga as a queen, right? We look at these people as these celebrities, as the aristocratic class, and most of the celebrity class is from the acting class. So we've seen sort of a shift here from the aristocracy being warrior-based and then being more merchant-based, more mercantile. I just did a video about Hungary where, I talked about how the Hungarian nobility, the Hungarian aristocracy, during this period of urbanization, from the 17th century up through Industrial Revolution, they were ennobling merchants. They were ennobling a significant number of merchants. So whenever you look at the aristocracy in Europe today, you're seeing a class of people which are highly infused with the merchant class. Whereas 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, if you looked at the average aristocrat, that person would have been basically a purebred in terms of being a warrior class type rather than being a merchant class type. So that's a huge distinction to make. And now we've moved. And so this is sort of, when we talk about the yugas or the ages in Hinduism, moving from, or we could talk about Greece, the golden age, the age of bronze, the age of iron, the progression of ages and how that relates to the progression of classes, you do see a progression here going from the aristocracy being identified as warriors, then as merchants, and now as actors. And who are actors? Well, I'm going to sort of flip around the argument I made in the beginning, which is that actors must be leftist because they can step into people's shoes, they can see things from all perspectives, therefore they're non-dogmatic. But actually, I would say that there's an aspect about acting which is hyper-dogmatic. So you walk up to Shia LaBeouf and you say, you're playing a Christian person, and he converts to Christianity. Or, you walk up to an actor and you say, you're going to play an evil man, and so that person takes on this mentality. So the authority comes from the director, from the producer, from the Hollywood people. Those very smart, very intelligent, very capable Hollywood people, those myth makers in Hollywood, they write the script, they direct the actors, and they say, you are this person. So we're going to give you a persona, and this is talked about a lot in Conspiracy, and I recommend everyone watch the Alex Jones, Joe Rogan interview because it's just fascinating purely in terms of the energy that's coming forth from, basically Alex Jones, and, he's getting a little feedback there, but it's amazing whether anything that's being said is true at all. It's the energy that's happening there is amazing. And if people could capture that energy, I don't know, maybe the water filters work. Maybe you need to go get yourself a Alex Jones water filter, Infowars.com. Not paid for this segment. But no, it's fascinating. And I like to see Alex Jones step away from the political stuff because the political stuff is so mundane, it's so superficial, it's so tired and boring. And all this stuff, it's like if what Alex Jones is saying is true, then, Trump is just as, in all likelihood, he's just as compromised as anybody else. So, it's much more fascinating. Again, even if it's all false, it's more, and it, you can look at stuff that, Gulf of Tonkin is verified. So it's not that every conspiracy theory is false. It can't be false if the government, unless the government's lying about lying, unless they say we faked the Gulf of Tonkin incident, but they're actually lying about that and it was true. Either way, a lie has transpired. So lying happens, coordinated lying happens, and we refer to that colloquially as a conspiracy. But, anyway, I recommend you watch that. But I was talking about the aristocracy, I was talking about actors, and there's a hyper-dogmatism where the actor is told, you are this person, and they say, yes, I am, and they're kind of like a robot emotionally in that way. They're almost like a child, where they're so receptive to suggestion that you say, you are this person, and they dedicate themselves to becoming hyper-dogmatic and getting into that mindset and getting into that character. And that is fascinating, a fascinating aspect. They're emotional sponges. Where you tell them, okay, in this scene, your dog just died, and so now you're going to start crying. And so on some level, they're able either to deceive or to fake it, or they literally force themselves in some sick way, they force themselves to actually believe that their dog has just died. Even though there are cameras everywhere, there's lighting guys, maybe there's a green screen, there's all kinds of stuff going on that a normal person would be like, You expect me to start crying? This is ridiculous. This is clownish. I can't just cry on command, especially men. But these actors are able to do it. And so you could say that, oh, well, that's because they're psychologically left-wing. They're able to consider things from all angles. They're able to create realities in their mind and project them and actually, for a moment, believe those realities to be true. And that's how they do this emotional portrayal. But I would say, no, isn't there an aspect in which they're hyper-dogmatic? They're hyper-dogmatic. And they're able to take anything and just absorb it and just become it. And that, to me, is the opposite of independent thinking. That, to me, is the opposite of having a defined personality and standing for something. And so, for me, the right wing is all about appealing to authority, appealing to dogmatism, and saying that, okay, the king is dead, long live the king. The kind of people who, during Nazism, they would have been Nazis. During communism, they would have been communists. During, the fall of communism, they would be Democrats or whatever. That kind of people, who are those people? What do we call those people? We call them politicians. And what is a politician if not an actor, right? They say a politician is just an ugly actor, and I believe that. And you look at Donald Trump, you look at Ronald Reagan, they are people who had their own movies and television programs, and so there's a deal of acting that's involved, putting on a show for the camera. And so that, to me, is dogmatic thinking. When you take some principle or axiom and you act as if it's true even though it's not. That, to me, is the essence of dogmatism, whereas leftism is all about finding the truth. It's all like, I don't care about your dogmatism. I don't care what you say is true because I'm skeptical. I don't think it is true, and I am dedicated to finding the truth. That, to me, is what leftism is that you look at the power structure. It could be anything. You could be criticizing communism or monarchism or theocracy or whatever it is. You're criticizing some dogmatic structure, and you're saying, no, it's not like that. No, there's all kinds of flaws and contradictions here, and you're just covering things up, and you're just going along with this idea for the sake of gaining power. Oh, yes, this country is our greatest ally, and, oh, yes, we have to, weed is good for you, and we need to legalize weed, and, if we don't stop the CO2, then the CO2 is going to kill everybody. Meanwhile, keep eating those GMOs and everything is sprayed with pesticides. So all these talking points, why do people say these ridiculous things about, we're all equal and, blah, blah, blah. These sort of talking points or a woman can do anything that a man can do. These platitudes, why do people say them? Most of the time they're saying them for power. And it could be a politician, or it could be a college student, or it could be, a Starbucks barista just mouthing it, just saying it, just going along. And it's not even a painful process for these people because they're not leftists, because they're conformists. To a conformist, you have to understand, to a conformist, to a sheep-like person, if you wake them up in the middle of the night and you shake them and you say, hey, the government's changed, and now instead of this being the dominant ideology, we've had a total change. They're just going to go, okay, yeah, all right, whatever. The guys with guns, the power structure said that we need to change our ideology. So, okay, we'll do whatever you say. And you saw this in Germany. There's so many regime changes, so many ideological changes in Germany, and you can look at the individuals, both in the top, the politicians, and at the bottom, who for different reasons, different motivations, they conformed. They conformed. When it was Nazism, they conformed to Nazism. When it was communism, they became good communists. And when it was democracy, they became good Democrats. So they change and change and change, and they don't see the problem because they have no loyalty to the truth. To them, the truth is just a buzzword. The truth is just whatever the dominant ideology is, and they never inquire. They have no epistemology. They have no method of discerning truth from falsehood. The only method that they use is, well, I mean, what's nouveau? What is the style? What is the fashion? What's popular? What is powerful? And they attach themselves to that. And that's a very good survival strategy. And that's why genetically we are predisposed toward this right-wing conformism. We want to just adopt whatever's popular. If it looks popular, it must be true. That's a heuristic we have in our minds because it's a very good one. And if you as an individual decide to go out and you just understand what the dominant ideology is, and you're like, okay, we need a little bit of populism, we need a little bit of socialism, but not too much because that's scary. And we need a little bit of, Americanism or nationalism, whatever. But it can't be like ethnic, it's got to be civic. And, you go down the line, picking and choosing from the left and the right, and you become a good moderate centrist, and you say, well, that's like the popular vote, but then we also need to go to the lobbyists and the big corporations, and so we need to support opiates, and we need to support foreign wars. And so you collect all these ideas, and if you conform to that, and you're of moderate intelligence, I'm saying you could have a lukewarm IQ. I mean, you could have a very average IQ, maybe at 110, and you can be a very successful politician if you're extroverted, if you're able to handle working with people, and you can give speeches and this sort of thing. You can become so successful. And so really what I'm saying is the left-wing person is the kind of person who is not willing to sacrifice the truth in order to gain power. And the right-wing person, we call this a healthy person. We call this a healthy, successful person. The healthy, successful person will say anything and do anything to gain power and money and fame and fortune and stability in their life. And these are the kind of people that women are attracted to who have good social standing. So whether it's a politician or whatever, this is how you gain power in society, by being right-wing. This is how you gain power, and people will love you for it. Women will love you for it, and you'll have everything. Everything you could desire, you can get it. And you can get some very bad things too. And so Pizzagate might not be real, but we know instances of people who are actually very powerful pedophiles. And they're very powerful, and whether, Pizzagate, the specific individuals, Comet Pizza might be totally innocent. But we know Jimmy Savile, we know or Savile, we know there are these people who were very powerful, and because of their power, they were able to abuse children. And so they sought to basically, their goal in life was to gain power for the purpose of feeding their fetish. And so they were willing to do and say anything to appear as popular as possible and to ingratiate themselves with the popular opinion, which is shaped by the media masters. And so ultimately, it's really about sucking up to the media masters. If you're the media master, then you control what's popular, what's not popular. And so you control all these psychologically right-wing people. And that's why I describe actors as right-wing, because they always suck up the dominant ideology. You never, I mean, you could say, oh, well, look at 1848, right? 1848 revolutions, there were all these people in drama and acting who were part of this revolutionary movement, but it was a popular movement. It was a popular movement developed by the media, by the newspapers. Who owned the newspapers? That's a very important question. Who owned these newspapers? Who was forming a public opinion at that time for the middle class, for the lower classes, for the intelligentsia? Who was forming the opinion? So, in a way, it's a right-wing revolution because they're just following what they're being told to do. They're being told that the nation is the popular thing, so they're just going along with that. Meanwhile, there's all this there's always this deception, part of a right-wing populist movement, part of a psychologically authoritarian movement, part of the media. The way that the media controls people is by telling them, you're fighting for freedom, you're an independent thinker. It tells people all these Orwellian things. It always tells people that you're on the side of good, you're a free thinker, you're fighting against dogma, you're fighting against tyranny. That's always what they will tell people when they want to control them, because they found that's the smartest thing to do. It confuses people, and it makes them unable, it makes my job difficult, which is trying to clearly explain psychologically what's going on here. It's complicated because I'm trying to tell you that actors are right-wing because they always go along with the mainstream, and you say, no, actors are totally far left. But they've taken these terms left and right, and they've totally inverted them and switched them back and forth to confuse people and to make a logical discussion is impossible. And if we can't discuss things logically, then we have to just follow whatever the media masters tell us. They give us a colloquial language, and they give us myths, and since we can't figure things out for ourselves because it's too complicated semantically, then we just have to default to the language that they've given us. Well, I think that I think that actors are right-wing. I think they do typically go with the fashionable opinion. They go with whatever their media masters tell them, because that's what they're used to doing. That's the type of people that they are. And the opposite of actor is a very genuine person. Someone who can't just induce emotion. Someone who, for them, emotion is very real. And you meet these people sometimes where they are just so real with you. They don't try to deceive you. And their emotions are what they really feel. And so, an actor is the type of person where you go up to them and you say to them, white privilege is such a terrible problem. And you say, yeah, it's such a terrible problem. It's like, yeah, white people suck. Old white dudes suck. And you kind of like smile and laugh along with that. And you don't feel any perturbation. It's like, wait a second, someday I'm going to be dead. Am I just going to be another dead white man? I mean, that's insulting. A genuine person is the kind of person who, when you insult them, they don't just laugh along. They kind of, they have a problem with that. Whereas a liar, a deceiver, will say, yes, those dead white men, that's so funny. Because they're like, all that matters is me gaining what I need to gain out of this social situation. I know what the politically correct opinion is, and I'm going to follow that opinion, and I'm going to go along with it, and just do whatever I need to do to get by and to appear as a normal person, as a popular person, as a fashionable person with all the right opinions. So that's what I need to do, and therefore, you can insult me, or you can degrade me, or you can suggest ridiculous things. I was just, back in 2008, I think there was this Lonely Island, and I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. Lonely Island. The guy, Bergstein, by Akiva Schaffer, Andy Samberg, and Jorma Taccone. So, they formed the Lonely Island. The biggest one is Andy Samberg. And Samberg, he's doing these things about, he's not particularly religious. He does this stuff about threesomes, and he does this stuff about making love to one another's mother. You swap your mom with my mom, and all this stuff is kind of ridiculous and silly, and it's packaged in the form of comedy, so then that, these conservative people can look at it, oh, they're just making fun of this stuff, this is so funny. But it's removing the disgust reaction. So instead of going, oh, this is gross, this is disgusting, why are you talking about this? Instead of having a disgust reaction, it's conditioning people to instead have a comedic reaction, to just laugh it off and say, this is so funny and ridiculous, this would never happen. So the movement from conditioning people away from the disgust reaction toward an amiable reaction or comedic reaction, and then to go from there to acceptance and tolerance, that is essentially the progression that has been decided, that this is the way that people work psychologically. If you want to change people socially, you take people who are disgusted about something and then you make it funny. And you saw this in Great Britain with Britain. I'm trying to think of the Polari. So Polari is a gay British dialect. And Polari became part of, in the 1960s in Britain, Polari became a huge part of certain TV shows. So Polari, Polari, was a form of cant slang used by actors, circus and showmen, professional wrestlers, sailors, criminals, prostitutes, in the gay subculture. It was used by Punch and Judy. Has Romani, or Gypsy language. It's got the Yiddish language. It's got all kinds of aspects to it. So, I'm trying to figure out which of the TV shows. So Round the Horn is one of these. Julian and Sandy, I think, was the one I was looking for. So Julian and Sandy, if you look this up, this was in 1965. Two old theatrical chaps. And as well as being a successful comedy act, Julian and Sandy were notable for being two stereotypical camp homosexual characters in mainstream entertainment at a time when homosexual acts between men were illegal in the United Kingdom. Writers and cast thought the characters worked very well. They were not simply the target of the joke. Paul Baker writes that these sketches, while mocking an oppressed gay identity, present gay people as cheerful, rather than indexing unhappy, ashamed identities like Victim 1961, blah, 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 or openly politicized identity adopted by members of the Gay Liberation Front. Their use of Polari in sketches introduced the gay cant to a mass audience and identified them as gay to those in the know. And this was the demise of Polari as a means of communication between gay men, because that covert communication was no longer required. Trying to think. A quote illustrating the use of double entendre. Will you take my case? Well, it depends on what it is. We've got a criminal practice that takes up most of our time. Yes, but apart from that, I need legal advice. Here, the word criminal practice refers to the fact that Julian is a practicing homosexual and also the law practice where he is currently employed. And, I don't know, you can read all about this on Wikipedia, the most reliable source on the internet. Polari. Polari, another connection back to actors, actors being the lowest rung of society, and so Polari is shared by criminals, and so acting has moved from being a criminal occupation, an occupation alongside prostitutes, and it has moved up to being the aristocracy, but it's a fake aristocracy. It's a controllable aristocracy. These people are put forth as the leaders, but they're not the real leaders. These people are put forth as the opinion makers, but they're not the real opinion makers. They're controlled by the people who control the media, the people who control Hollywood, the people who fund it. The money. Who pays the actors? That's the important question. Whoever pays the actors controls the opinions of the actors. And that's why actors were thought of as prostitutes, because it's like you pay them and you can make them do anything. In the same way you can pay a prostitute to do anything. And that's why Weinstein or Weinberg or whatever... Was it Harvey Weinstein? Yeah, it was Harvey Weinstein. Sorry. I get Anthony Weiner and Harvey Weinstein. I get all these people mixed up. But anyway, you have Harvey Weinstein, and he pays women to be actors. And then he's like, hey, I'm paying you to be an actor. Would you allow me? Would you watch me as I skeet into this ficus? And to him, it's the same thing, because it really is the same thing. So actors are prostitutes. Oh my goodness. All in defense of Harvey Weinstein's lawyer. Harvard shouldn't publish Harvey Weinstein's lawyer. All this defense of Harvey Weinstein from Bloomberg and The Atlantic is the first thing that comes up. I say give the lawyer due process to the full extent of the law. I say that's what the lawyer deserves. But yeah, I mean, Weinstein runs the show. It's not the actors. The actors are put up as frontmen. It's kind of like when you look at a ship and you see a mermaid at the front of the ship, at the bow of the ship, and you say, oh, the mermaid must be controlling the ship. No, the mermaid is not controlling the ship. The captain at the wheel is controlling the ship. So Weinstein is the captain at the wheel, and the mermaid is the actor. And the actor says, oh, support the Green New Deal, and you know... this is funny and we should just laugh. You know, it's the movement from disgust to comedy to acceptance and tolerance and then forced acceptance, and then it becomes dogma. All of that is a carefully calculated mythological, psychological, societal control, redirection, reprogramming the masses, essentially. This is a very tried and true method. It's methodological. It is it's a science. It's a social science of controlling people. So you take the most attractive people, who are these actors, and you put them up there and you make them say and do anything you want, and that's how you control society. But the actors themselves have no power. The actors themselves can be destroyed and created with the drop of a hat. They have no internal creativity to them. They have no, or else they would be the directors, they would be the script writers. Now there's sort of some crossover, say Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson was an actor, and then he became a director, and so on and so forth. So I'm obviously not saying that you can't ever combine the two, but these are distinct classes, that the acting class is a prostitute class that goes out and propagandizes the masses. And so the acting class is a right-wing class. And prostitutes are a right-wing class. Prostitutes are a right-wing class because you go up to them and you give them money, essentially a form of currency, a form of power, and they'll do whatever you want. So they're right-wing, whereas a left-wing person cares about the truth. A left-wing person has principles. A left-wing person says, no, I don't care how much money and power you give me. I'm going to stick to what I know is true and moral and good. That's what the left is. The left always revolts against dogma because dogma is never true. Because science is always evolving. We're learning new things because the environment is changing. You know, the environment's constantly changing, so we're learning more things about the environment, but as we learn more, we have better technology. Technology changes the environment, and so then there's more to learn about this new environment, and then we get a new technology as a result. So that's a cyclical process. There's never going to be a perfect dogma, you can just read some book, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know. No, that's right-wing thinking. And prostitutes are right-wing, and Hollywood is right-wing, and all these people are right-wingers, and the media is right-wing, and to oppose all of this stuff, and to be disgusted by it, and to want to change it, means that you're thinking with a left-wing mind. If you are a right-wing person, all you would care about is, well, might makes right. This is what I have people coming on my channel with this Ragnar Redbeard, ridiculous might makes right stuff. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it because it's a right-wing ideology. I am sick of this concept that might makes right. If might makes right, then convert to Judaism and say all the right things and become a politician and make $1 million. It's easy to make $1 million, guys. Again, if you have an IQ of 110 and you're not a freak, and I guess, you know, there are freaks out there that, well, I'm a freak and therefore I can't do that. And so because they're self-hating, then they believe they can't be successful, and so that is also a dark aspect to leftism, you could say. It is legitimate to say that if someone is sort of black-pilled about their own personal prospects, if someone comes to the point where they say, I'm never going to be successful, and it could be purely psychological, they could have tons of potential. But if they hate themselves for whatever reason, maybe they were abused, maybe they were neglected, whatever the story is, but they could get in a situation where when someone says to them, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. And they say, well, I can't join them. Because to join them would mean being successful. And there are some people who just, success is anathema to them. They can't embrace the concept of themselves being successful because they've so strongly identified with failure. And so that is a problem sometimes with the left, is that oftentimes people who are unwilling to join the right wing are people who are fundamentally psychologically crippled in a lot of ways. That is a problem, but you know, if these people can solve their personal turmoil or come to terms with whatever it is, and again, it's very difficult. You can be ugly, you can be short, you can be of average intelligence, and if you say the right things and do the right things, it's very easy to become rich, and it's very easy to, you know, hire a long-term hooker, otherwise known as marrying a sugar baby or whatever that is. You can acquire a lot of things in life in terms of hedonism, in terms of sex, in terms of food and travel and a big house. You can acquire a lot of monetary benefits simply by saying and doing the right-wing thing, even if you have all kinds of disadvantages. And if you're going to argue, oh, well, that's not possible, I think that's more of a lack of imagination on your part. I think that's more of a, Or it's you're imagining a universe in which you can't succeed, and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you might be a person who has convinced yourself so vigorously, so enthusiastically that you're never going to succeed, and so the concept of joining the right-wing power structure is anathema to you, and that's why you're interested in leftism. And that's what psychologically is driving you there. And so that is a legitimate criticism coming from the right wing. I've criticized the right wing. I've said that the right wing only cares about power. It only cares about might, doesn't care about right, doesn't care about what's true, doesn't care about merit, doesn't care about actually having an evolutionary system. I've said that, but then the right can come back and say, hey, you're just a bunch of freaks and losers. There's something wrong with you. And I think there's a point to that because, again, psychologically, genetically, we are conditioned through Darwinian evolution to be conformist, to find out, okay, what's the popular ideology? How do I fit into the social structure? We are designed to figure that out and then to sort of act in a way that helps us to blend in. That is such a crucial part of our social survival. As social creatures, we need to do that in order to reproduce. Because reproduction is collective, it's not individual. Unless you're not living on Gilligan's Island, you're not Robinson Crusoe, you're living in a society, you're living in a tribe, you're living in some social setting, so you need to adapt to it. And if you can't adapt, you die. So this desire for ideological conformity, or right-wing thinking, above searching for the truth, that is normative behavior. That is normal. It is normal when the church and the schools and the Hollywood entertainment and the late night comedians, everyone says it's okay to be gay. It's great to be gay. In fact, it's superior to be gay because it means you're more open-minded and you're better at interior decorating, you're probably smarter, you have more money. All of this narrative is constructed. The healthy normative thing to do is to accept that narrative, to accept that mythology, and to repeat it when people ask, what do you think about gay people? Oh, well, I think they're better at interior decorating. I think they're smarter. But you would never mention anything else about, risky behavior, drug use, suicide, STDs. You would never mention that because that's not socially acceptable. So we are conditioned through evolution as social creatures living in a social environment. We are conditioned not to just seek for the truth. In fact, truth-seeking is a very, very small part of the average human's life because it doesn't make sense in the short term. See, most people are geared toward short-term survival. I want a house in the next 10 years. I want kids in the next 10 years. I want to get married in the next 10 years. I want to get a college degree in the next 10 years. Everyone is thinking in terms of the next couple decades of their life because after a few decades, you're going to be old and you're going to die, and that's short-term thinking. And so in the short term, truth doesn't matter. In the short term, all that matters is social acceptance. So in the short term, all that matters is being right-wing. But in the long term, the truth is hugely important. If you're running on lies, eventually your civilization's going to crash. Eventually there's going to be some kind of disaster. Now, the people, the media masters, the people who create the ideology that controls society, their thinking is that technology is progressing so fast that the long term doesn't matter. We shouldn't care about the long term. All we should care about is amassing power in the here and now, because in 20 years and 30 years, robots are going to take over. And so they don't care about the future. They don't care. All they care about is the short term. And that's what capitalism incentivizes, is foreseeable profits. That is short-term profits. But searching for the truth means you're asking yourself, what is true and what's sustainable in the long term? If we take these trends and we extrapolate them out, what happens? Do they still hold true? Because you can have an experiment and you can flip a quarter 50 times and you can say, well, it came up heads every single time. Does that prove that the quarter is always going to land on heads? No. Because, if we actually model it out, we can say, no, there's times when it lands on tails. And in fact, you've biased and you've cheated things to make it appear as if it landed on heads. You've messed with the study. You've lied in your data. So these things eventually catch up with people. It's a question of, are you thinking on the long term or the short term? Because in the short term, everything that's bad for you has no consequence. Consequences are almost always long term. When you do a really powerful drug, it feels great in the short term. There are always going to be long-term consequences. To any drug that makes you feel good, there are always long-term consequences. Even exercise has long-term consequences. I mean, if you become a champion athlete, a lot of times that will destroy your body. By the time you're 50, by the time you're 60, you might be in a wheelchair. You might be in incredible pain. You're risking huge injury. So, anything that feels good comes with risks and comes with consequences. And I guess it's up to every individual has to decide for themselves, are you going to, do the thing that feels good in the moment that has long-term consequences, or are you going to, defer that? It's funny. I was listening to a bit of Rushvi, not because I want his advice. In fact, sort of the opposite in this situation. He's describing how he's changed and how he went from being a man who his whole life was centered around chasing women. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And he said, you know what? I should have discovered long ago that there was no point to this. That, it was all empty. It was all just hedonism. It felt good, and I was chasing the next high and chasing the next high. And eventually I realized that this is the same thing as if I was a drug addict. Now I'm putting words into his mouth, but you can go listen to his own words, and you can go follow his content. And I think he's at least he's coming out with something truthful. And so I'd encourage people to listen to him at this point. But he says, if I had just listened to E. Michael Jones, because E. Michael Jones didn't do this stuff. E. Michael Jones didn't have to have the lived experience of being a hedonist in order to understand there's something fundamentally wrong with hedonism. Hedonism is not a sustainable lifestyle. Hedonism is actually fundamentally destructive to you as a person, spiritually, in your soul. And E. Michael Jones didn't need to experiment with hedonism to understand that. E. Michael Jones he was smart enough, and that's a very important thing here, guys, because, as I told you, in the 1980s, Tom Metzger held Charlottesville. He had a Charlottesville rally, except it wasn't in Charlottesville, Virginia, it was in California. And you can go see video of it. There is video of this rally, and he's got people with shields, and he's got people with stall helms, and it's an exact carbon copy. In fact, if you doctored the footage a little bit, I'm sure you could make it appear as if that was Charlottesville footage. Because the people look exactly the same. They're wearing goggles. It's very silly. He did this thing, and this is totally passed out of societal memory. And then people said, you know what? Maybe 2016 or whatever. I don't even remember when this rally was at this point. It was 2017, I guess. 2017, they said, you know what? It's time for Charlottesville. It's time to have a Charlottesville. It's time to do this. Never did anyone say, hey, has this been tried before? And so there's very little institutional memory. And so what I'm saying is if you want to succeed, you have to be able to learn things without making the failures. If everything that we did in life was predicated upon experiencing failure and learning from our mistakes, we would be dead. There are so many things like look both ways before you cross the street. I didn't need to test that. I didn't need to run across the street, get hit by a car, and say, oh, of course. Why didn't I just listen to E. Michael Jones when he said look both ways? Oh, now I'm going to change the error of my ways. Now, if reincarnation is true, maybe this is true in some kind of grand perennial aspect. But at least individually, there are some things where you can't do it. You can't experiment with it. You can't experiment. If you have an addictive personality, do not experiment with drugs. Because you can destroy your life permanently and never come back from it and die. And that's it. That's the one chance you get in this life, in this iteration of life. So there's so many things concerning hedonism where people say, oh, you should try everything at least once. No. If you do that, if you do all these risky behaviors, you're going to get yourself killed, or you're going to destroy your life, or you're going to be beyond the pale of salvation, essentially. At least in this iteration. So be like E. Michael Jones and learn and be smart, and don't just make the mistakes. So don't just say, well, we had to try it for ourselves to prove that it was wrong. That's what I hear people saying. We had to go march in the streets because we weren't sure if it would work or not. We thought maybe it was possible. We didn't know. We thought the cops might be our friends, and then they turned out not to be our friends. It's like if you had just listened to people who had tried the same exact thing, 20, 30 years ago, if you listened to them, and you learned from them, and you did research, and you looked at the data, and you looked at everything, and you tried to model reality beforehand, you would have learned, hey, you know what? The risks are not worth the reward here. We're not going to just try it to just see what happens, because you're risking people's lives. You're risking people's lives, and furthermore, you're incurring deplatforming. I mean, deplatforming happens as a result of people doing stupid stuff. People do stupid stuff, and people get deplatformed, and that spreads. So even people who didn't do, I mean, Jared Taylor has tried to be very smart with what he does. Even he's being deplatformed as a result of other people doing stupid stuff. Oh, I love Jared Taylor, and the best way to advance his message is to march in the streets. And therefore, you know, Jared's not able to control that, and so he's getting deplatformed. So the only solution I see is you have to encourage people, you have to speak to people and say, look, don't be stupid. And if you're going to be stupid, I'm mad with you, I don't like you, I disavow you, I don't want anything to do with you. That's really the best thing that you can do. You shouldn't encourage these people. You have to shame them. You have to shame them until either they change their ways or until you have two separate distinct movements in the public eye. And of course, people, you know, extreme right-wing Democrats who say, oh, well, Trump is controlled by Russia, and Russia is the only country that interferes in American elections, right? Oh, you know, it's only Russia. It couldn't be anyone else, certainly not any of our allies. So, you know, these kind of right-wing Democrats, these extremely authoritarian Democrats, they're, of course, always going to call Trump a Nazi, a white supremacist. But there are so many people who are in the middle, who are reachable, who are reasonable, who are going to make the distinction between Nazis and Trump. I would say the majority of the country, if you ask them, is Trump literally Hitler? A majority of Americans would say no. I mean, even you could ask black Americans, you could ask Hispanics, you could ask Jews, you could ask whoever. Is Trump literally Hitler? Is he actually a Nazi? Do you think Trump is a racist? Do you think he's a white supremacist? And I'm sure there's been data. Is Trump a racist poll? Let's see what the poll says. Most Americans say Trump is racist. This is 1039thefox.com. It's not Fox News. Hampton Roads Classic Rock. 47% of Americans thinks Trump's policy have been bad for Americans, bad for Hispanics, bad for African Americans. More than half of Americans think Donald Trump is a racist. This is the Associated Press Public Affairs Research. Bad for Muslims, bad for Hispanics, bad for African Americans. Okay, 57% of all adults, including 8 in 10 blacks, 3/4 of Hispanics, and nearly half of whites. So it's not half of whites. It's like 49% or something. A majority of whites do not believe Donald Trump is racist. 85% of Democrats consider Trump racist. 21% of Republicans agree. 21% of Republicans think Trump is racist, and they're probably like, yeah, I'm voted for him anyway. So this is interesting. When is this data from? A year ago. So, and then they bring up Charlottesville and blah, 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 blah. It's an unforced error. You don't need to do this. I mean, there's even a Wikipedia page called The Racial Views of Donald Trump. CNN is using capital. 49% of people say they believe Donald Trump to be a racist by a Quinnipiac University poll. 84% of black voters think Donald Trump is racist. Yeah, because black people are extremely right-wing. They'll listen to whatever the media tells them. But, you know, this is not half. White people can make the distinction. And this is what you have to be thinking. You can't, when you look at these statistics, you can't just lump everybody together, because you're going to be confusing extremely conformist populations with less conformist populations. 49% of people think he is a racist. 47% believe he is not. And 86% of Republicans say Trump isn't a racist. 86% of Democrats say he is. They are not necessarily. More people feel unfavorably about his job performance than say he's a racist. 55 to 49. Blah blah blah. So yeah, people can make the distinction. At least white people can make the distinction between, Trump and people who are marching in the streets. And I don't think just, this argument, well, they're going to call you a Nazi anyway, so you should just be a Nazi. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to buy into the stereotype created by Hollywood of who I am and what I should be. That does not make any sense. They're projecting an image of failure, and they want you to conform to that image. And you say, well, that's who they say the devil is, so I guess I'm going to be a Satanist and embrace the devil. It's a very strange thing. I'm just going through his racial views, because this is like an extremely detailed... Oh, he supported the white farmers in South Africa, so I guess he's a racist. All of this. And then you have a little bit of... You have defenses of Donald Trump. 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs compared to this entire thing with like multiple different articles within it. Yeah, so there you go. But I think that... I think basically... we can see that people can derive distinctions. People can see that there are differences between different kind of attitudes, and if you just embrace what people say you are, if you just embrace the bad guy image, you say, yeah, well, they say we're Nazis who wear Stahlhelms, so we're just going to put on some Stahlhelms because they're going to say it anyway. That activates the immune system. That activates the trigger, because they're looking at you and you're like, oh my gosh, you're a Hollywood Nazi, so it's time to kill you, because that's what we do to Hollywood Nazis. We kill them. So to act like that is so wrong, and it is so much better to, and people can say disguise your views if you want to say it that way, or reformulate or change your optics or whatever. But you can't just take whatever you can't just look at society and say, what is the worst thing that you can be, and then just copy that and expect good results, because all of society is going to come down on you. And the people who do that are basically people who are antagonistic internally, and they externalize that by fighting, warring with society, because there's so much inner conflict going on within them. If you actually want to do something productive, you don't push your views. Again, look at how the powerful people push their views. They don't do it they didn't do it by marching in the streets. That did not achieve sexual orientation progress in America. Social views on sexual orientation were not changed by street marches. They were changed through comedy, which is an insidious method. They were changed through talking about tolerance and acceptance. They were changed through mythologies of the underdog, mythologies of the left out person, mythologies of accepting aliens, being nice to aliens, E.T., extraterrestrial. Look at E.T. E.T. kind of looks like an AIDS patient. So, we go through all of this, the worship of the broken. There's so many methods that are used to create sympathy, to change people's minds on issues that are not direct, that are not like, hey, we're going to have a massive street march. That's not how change is effective. Street marches are victory parades. They come when you've already established mythological dominance and you want to express your power. But if you don't have any power, then there's nothing to express except your own failure. So Charlottesville was an expression of failure. If you want to change society, you have to do so tapping into people's psychology, how people work mythologically. It can be a logical argument, but it can also be a mythic argument. It can be an artistic argument. You would do so much better to practice your artistic skills. There are essentially 2 ways to reach people. You can write an article, and you can say, here's the data. This is kind of what Ryan Falk had tried to do in the past, although now he's much better at video editing. His videos have all these nice backgrounds now. But in the past, he used to just put up a picture of like a star and then just talk for an hour. And, well, I mean, that's kind of what I do, except I don't have a picture of a star. But it was just very bare bones, and he was focusing on data. He was saying, here's the data about this, here's the data about that. And that's going to reach some very data-focused people. But most people are not data-focused. And so then you want to reach people through artwork. And that artwork is not going to be, again, Hollywood Nazism. Because all you're doing then is you're either triggering people who are trained to believe that's evil, or you're attracting people who identify with evil. Those are the two reactions you're getting. People who want to be evil and people who think you're evil and are repelled by you. Neither of those two things are good. You want to attract people who want to do good, who are good, who want to find the truth and want to find goodness. So artwork is an extremely important thing. Visual art, music, and also just the art of aesthetics in general. Aesthetics in general is a powerful thing. So it's something that people should investigate. And aesthetics, people think, when people think of the meme of aesthetics, they think, oh, going to the gym, getting really buff. That's not the totality of aesthetics, just the aesthetics of the physical body. There's so much more you could do with aesthetics. There's so much technology out there, decentralized technology you can get for very cheap. And you can train yourself independently. You don't need to take a class. You don't need to pay any money to find this out. You can become a graphic designer. You can become a programmer. You can become a web designer. I think it would be amazing if some programmers could get together and create video games that had a mythology that was anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment, that put in all kinds of themes that were subversive themes. I think that would be great. And you could market that to people, and you would never have to release your political opinions. This is a pro-Trump video game. No, don't do it so explicitly. Do it implicitly. And I think that would be a great project, because if you can reach people when they're children, and you can implant those mythological axioms, especially anything associated with medieval Europe, I think is very mythologically powerful. You're going to essentially prime them to want to defend European medieval civilization. So there are deep implications to art and artwork and aesthetics that I think people should consider more often. People should be creating video games. People should be creating music. People should be creating artwork. And it should be low art and it should be high art. I mean, I'd love for people to be really, as sort of a priestly task, dedicate your life to the pursuit of art, to the pursuit of classicalism and sculpture. But then you also need people, I think, who are revolutionary in their artistic style, who are willing to go with the fashion, go with the currents, but introduce subversive elements to it. I mean, that's a lot of what modernism was. That modernism was both a precursor and integrated a lot with many fascist movements and with communist movements. They were this new ideology was accompanied by a new artwork, by a new aesthetic. And I don't think just techno or fash wave or whatever that is. Just this worship of the 1980s. I mean, the 1980s, it's all about worshiping normalcy and the normative era of Reagan and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's so fake and it's so superficial. And I think there has to be something. And I'm not a musician necessarily, but I think there are some really good musicians out there who need to start experimenting with the edge of trends and projecting those trends and seeing how you can play with that. And it doesn't need to be explicit. You don't need to put lyrics in there that are extremely explicit. But you can do it very subtly. I think the subtle propaganda is the most effective. And if you really want to look back in history at what did the propagandists have to say about propaganda, did they say, oh, you just pump it full of propaganda and it's explicit and it's in your face? No. The best propaganda is subconscious. It's subtle. It's in the back of your mind. It's like in the foreground you have the main plot, but in the background you have the subplot, and the subplot is the propagandistic element, the ideological element. That's what's really most effective, because our axiomatic thinking happens subconsciously. It's very hard to consciously access your axiomatic thinking. So something like God is real or God is fake, that's a sort of axiomatic principle that can't really be accessed by the conscious mind. We either believe or we don't, and that's something that we essentially, our axiom forms in childhood. Before we have any kind of skeptical or logical thinking, children are very right-wing, they're very conformist, and so whatever you throw at them, they're just going to absorb like a sponge. People say, oh, children are so rebellious. No, they're not rebellious. They're just following the mainstream, and the mainstream tells them to be this and that, and so that, the mainstream tells them it's cool to be self-destructive, and so they're self-destructive. But being youthful has nothing to do with rebellion. Being youthful has to do with conformism, essentially, massive conformism. And you look at the media has projected that young people should be self-destructive, and so as a result, young people become self-destructive. And this goes back to the 1960s. Wearing jeans is such a right-wing thing. Wearing jeans, it's this idea of pretending to be working class when you're not actually working class. This whole thing with jeans in the 1950s, 1960s was all about pretending to be low class or working class when you're not. And that's sort of when the Hollywood jeans, like Hollywood actors wearing jeans. Look at the history of jeans. Let's look at the history of jeans so I can throw some. No, I want Wikipedia. Thank you. I want Wikipedia, the trusted source for all information, and you don't need anything else. So the jean fabric, 17th century, 19th century, I don't care. Let's see, we've got 1960s. James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Wearing jeans became a symbol of youth rebellion in the 1950s. 1970s, they became casual wear. And so now we have all these people wearing jeans, and jeans are so expensive. So that was the concept. The concept with jeans is that you have this fake rebellion, you have this fake self-destruction, you have all this fake superficial stuff where you pretend to be, a rebel without a... And that's what they want people to be, without a cause. They just want you to be rebellious. They don't want you to have any kind of cause. To be totally confused. That is the concept here. So jeans are right-wing. Is that the title? That can't be the title. The titles are a problem because you want to put everything in the title. But the titles have to be short. They've got to be snappy. So we can't just put everything in the title. But that's enough for today. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.